ClickUp just solved AI's biggest problem, and it's saving 4 million teams from productivity loss every day. Unlike ChatGPT and other AI tools, ClickUp converges all your work into one platform, so your AI super agents have full context to prioritize tasks, execute workflows, and draft documents instantly. Teams using ClickUp finish work 30% faster and cut meetings in half. Try ClickUp for free today and get 15% off AI upgrades at clickup.com/podcast. That's CLICKUP.com/podcast.
When stress, late nights, and daily routines make it hard to unwind, your skin can feel it. Now there's a better way to care for your skin overnight with Osea's new Dream Bioretinol Body Serum. A dreamy bedtime body serum powered by bioretinol and red seaweed to visibly firm and smooth, while soothing magnesium and lavender helps promote a sense of serenity. Osea's President's Day offer is live this week only. Get a free full-size anti-aging body balm with purchases over $125 at OseaMalibu.com.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Scary. Don't forget, if you have your own paranormal experience that you'd like me to narrate on the show, you can send it to scaryaparanormalpodcast at gmail.com and it just might get made into a future episode. Before we get into this week's episode, as always, I need to say a special thank you to our new Patreon subscribers, who are Trina Cadden, Maria Spannell, Lydia Mewett, Bo Villalobos, Nicole, Christy Cahoon, Sharon Gorman, and ASOG 1982. Thank you so much for signing up to the show's Patreon, and if this is something you're interested in, you can find the link in this episode's show notes, where you can gain access to exclusive Scary episodes as well as ad-free main episodes. But now, let's get into our next paranormal case. The town of Amherst sits on the northern edge of Nova Scotia, close to the narrow strip of land that connects the province to New Brunswick. By the late 19th century, Amherst was growing. Rail connections had brought industry into the area, and with it, a steady population of labourers and tradesmen. Foundries, mills, and small manufacturing businesses operated alongside farms that had existed for generations. The town itself was not large. People knew one another. News travelled quickly. Privacy was, well, limited. Houses at the time were typically wooden, heated by stoves and crowded by modern standards. Extended families often lived together, sharing expenses and labour. Children slept in shared rooms, and visitors to homes were common. A household might contain parents, siblings, relatives, and boarders all under the same roof. In this environment, daily life was rarely quiet. On Princess Street stood the home of Daniel Teed and his wife Olive. The house was typical for Amherst at the time, practical and fairly modest. Living with them were several members of Olive's extended family, including her younger sister Esther Cox. Esther was 18 years old in 1878. She had not had an easy childhood. Her mother died when she was very young, and much of her upbringing was spent moving between relatives' homes. Descriptions portray her as reserved and serious. She worked when work was available, and otherwise helped around the household. The Teed home itself was busy. Daniel worked long hours, and Olive managed the home and children. Other relatives came and went. Space was limited, and like many families of the period, daily life required cooperation to function. Meals were shared. Evenings were spent indoors, especially as summer began to fade. By August 1878, Nothing about the house on Princess Street distinguished it from any other house in Amherst. There were no stories attached to it. It had no reputation as such, and no reason for anyone outside the family to take notice. Within weeks, that would all change. What happened inside this house between the late summer of 1878 and the following year would become known as the Amherst Mystery, one of the most widely reported and debated paranormal cases in Canadian history. Doctors, neighbours, journalists, and later investigators would all attempt to explain what took place here. Late August 1878. The first event did not begin as a haunting or a public spectacle. It began as a personal incident involving Esther Cox herself. Esther had been walking with a young man she knew in the Amherst area when he attempted to assault her. The attack was thankfully interrupted before it could go further, but the experience left her badly shaken. In the days that followed, family members described her as distressed and fearful. 19th century medical language would later describe such reactions as nervous shock, though at the time the family simply understood that something had deeply unsettled her, and for good reason. Within a short period after this incident, things began to happen inside the Teat house. The earliest reports described knocking sounds heard at night. These sounds were faint enough to be dismissed. The house was wooden, and noises caused by temperature changes, wind, or movement were common in buildings of that kind. Naturally, the family searched for ordinary explanations. When these knocks began to be frequent, the family checked the doors and windows. They looked for animals beneath the house or in the walls. Nothing unusual was found, and the sounds continued. By the end of August, the knocking had become louder and more deliberate. Family members described it as coming from walls, floors, or furniture, rather than from outside. The noises did not follow a predictable pattern. They occurred at different times of the night and sometimes stopped when people entered the room, only to begin again later. At this stage, the disturbances remained confined to sound alone. There were no reports yet of objects moving or damage being done. The family's concern was practical rather than fearful. Something in the house was making noise, and they expected to eventually find the cause. It was becoming a daily irritant. At around the same time, Esther began experiencing physical episodes that alarmed those living with her. Esther would become feverish or unwell, and that would be followed by sudden exhaustion. On at least one occasion, she reportedly experienced convulsions while in bed, and a doctor was called to examine her. His presence did not immediately resolve the situation, and no clear diagnosis was recorded in surviving accounts. Esther would go on to experience further episodes described at the time as fits or seizures. Witnesses claimed that during these episodes, her body became rigid and that she appeared feverish. Afterwards, she was said to be exhausted and confused. A physician was called again to examine her, though no clear medical explanation was ever recorded in any surviving accounts. During one visit, strange things occurred in the doctor's presence. Knocking sounds were heard while he was in the room, and scratching noises could be heard from the walls near Esther's bed. But there was something else. On the wall, a message had appeared. It seemed to be a direct threat, and was recorded as reading, "Esther Cox, you are mine to kill." Of course, news of the events began to spread more openly through Amherst. Neighbours who visited the house reported hearing noises themselves. Some came expecting to find a simple explanation and left without one. The house on Princess Street slowly became known beyond the immediate neighbourhood. And despite all this, the family continued attempting to live normally. Work continued during the day, evenings were spent together indoors, often with visitors present. Some nights passed quietly. On others, loud bangs or movement within the house brought everyone awake. The lack of consistency made the events difficult to explain. There was no single movement that transformed the situation into a public mystery. Instead, the change happened gradually, as more people claimed to have witnessed events they could not easily account for. By mid-September 1878, the atmosphere inside the Teed household had shifted noticeably. Fear was creeping in. Some visitors began to suggest supernatural explanations. Others argued more strongly that deception was being involved. And the events were about to escalate again. By the autumn of 1878, what had begun as unexplained noises inside the Teed household had developed into something more difficult for those present to ignore. The sounds and incidences reported were no longer occasional. They were becoming physical, unpredictable, and increasingly alarming to those who witnessed them. Activity continued to centre on Esther Cox. People described loud noises that seemed to come from inside the walls, beneath the floor, or from furniture within the room, and some compared the sounds to blows struck against wood. Others described them as sharp cracks, loud enough to be heard throughout the house. And at times, the noises appeared to answer questions or respond to attention, though accounts of this are varied. Objects were said to move without visible cause. Items fell from shelves or were displaced while several people were present. Visitors claimed to have seen small household items slide or shift across surfaces. Furniture was reported to move suddenly. In some accounts, boxes or items were said to have been thrown or knocked aside. As the weeks passed, the situation escalated further when small fires began to occur within the house. Bedding and other household items were reported to have ignited unexpectedly. These fires were extinguished before causing serious damage, but they changed how the situation was viewed. You can deal with a knock or something falling off a shelf, but when something is on fire in a wooden home in 1878, tragedy can occur very quickly. What had once been unsettling now appeared dangerous. Neighbours and local authorities began to consider whether someone inside the house might be responsible. Suspicion increasingly fell on Esther. The incidences were most often reported when she was present, and some observers believed she might be causing them, intentionally or otherwise. Others rejected this idea, pointing out that events had reportedly taken place while she was being closely watched. The household itself became divided between belief and doubt. More knocking, this time on the front door, but it was neighbours. People began arriving hoping to witness something unexplained. At times, rooms were crowded with observers waiting for something to occur. It was during this period that Walter Hubble arrived. Hubble, an actor and travelling salesman, took a strong interest in the case and soon became closely involved with Esther and the household. He claimed to have witnessed unusual activity personally, including sounds and movement of objects without visible cause. Hubble began recording events in detail. His later book, published in 1879, would become the primary source for much of what is known about the Amherst mystery. His involvement also increased doubt. Some residents believed the attention surrounding the case encouraged exaggeration, and that Hubble's presence transformed the situation into something closer to a performance. Regardless, the reported activity continued through the autumn months. Esther's health fluctuated, with periods of apparent calm followed by renewed episodes of illness and reported activity around her. As winter arrived, Esther spent periods away from the Teed household in an effort to restore normality to the home. According to accounts, unusual incidences were reported in some of the places where she stayed or worked. People described knocking sounds and objects moving shortly after her arrival. For those inclined to believe, this suggested that whatever was happening was connected to Esther herself rather than the house. And for skeptics, it reinforced the belief that she was responsible. Public sympathy towards Esther began to change during this period. Earlier concern for her health and circumstances, including the attempted assault, which she had experienced months before, gradually gave way to doubt. The fires reported during the autumn had raised serious concerns, and continued attention surrounding the case strained patience within the community. But the turning point came early in 1879. While working at a barn, a fire broke out under circumstances authorities considered suspicious. Investigators concluded that the fire had been deliberately set. Esther was arrested and charged with arson. Esther was tried and convicted, receiving a sentence of 4 months' imprisonment. The verdict did not resolve questions surrounding earlier reports inside the Teed household, but it did change public perception. For many, the conviction confirmed that earlier events had been deliberate, and others argued that the verdict did not account for incidences witnessed by multiple people before the case gained widespread attention. Walter Hubble remained publicly supportive of Esther, maintaining that she was not responsible for the earlier phenomena. He argued that the arson conviction should not be taken as proof that the entire case had been fraudulent. His defence of her became increasingly controversial, particularly as critics noted that many of the most dramatic details originated from his own account. After serving only part of her sentence, Esther was released early, reportedly due to illness. Following her release, reports of unusual activity gradually declined. Knocking sounds and reports of moving objects became less frequent and eventually ceased altogether. There was no clear ending. Instead, these events faded over time until they stopped being reported. By early 1879, the Amherst mystery had effectively come to an end. With the events over, attention in Amherst slowly moved elsewhere. The house on Princess Street returned to being an ordinary residence, and the months of attention it had received became a matter of local memory rather than ongoing concern. Esther Cox eventually left Amherst. She later married, and after being widowed, remarried. Surviving records showed that she lived a largely ordinary life in the years that followed. There are no reliable reports of similar events occurring later in her life. She died in 1912 following a road accident near Amherst, and with her death, any personal explanation she might have offered disappeared. The story itself endured largely because of Walter Hubble's book, The Great Amherst Mystery. Hubble presented the case as genuine, arguing that Esther had been the focus of a force beyond her control. His account became the foundation for most later retellings. Because so much of the detail originates from a single narrative, it would be wise to approach the case cautiously. Hubble had both personal involvement and financial incentive in presenting the Great Amherst Mystery. In later years, the Amherst case came to be associated with what would be described as poltergeist phenomena. Similar cases often involve physical movement of objects, loud noises, and activity centred around a young individual under stress, with events beginning suddenly and ending without clear explanation. More than a century later, the Amherst mystery remains one of Canada's most widely known historical paranormal cases, continuing to be discussed in books, documentaries, and local history as an event that never received a clear or universally accepted explanation. Thank you for listening to this week's episode. If you like what you hear, you can hit that follow button so you don't miss any future episodes. The links to the podcast socials can be found in the episode show notes, and we hit a milestone this week on our Facebook super group, which hit 1,000 followers, which is pretty awesome. Once again, thank you for listening, and join me next time for another episode of Scary.
ClickUp just solved AI's biggest problem, and it's saving 4 million teams from productivity loss every day. Unlike ChatGPT and other AI tools, ClickUp converges all your work into one platform, so your AI super agents have full context to prioritize tasks, execute workflows, and draft documents instantly. Teams using ClickUp finish work 30% faster and cut meetings in half. Try ClickUp for free today and get 15% off AI upgrades at clickup.com/podcast. That's CLICKUP.com/podcast.
It's native. Hey girl, what's happening? Is that your antiperspirant?
Yeah.
Let me see that can. Aluminum butane. I cannot pronounce that. You have to switch to Native deodorant. Native Simple Formula has only clean ingredients. It gives you effective 72-hour odor protection with no hydrocarbon propellants.
Wow, this smells heavenly.
Clean, effective 72-hour odor protection isn't a myth.
It's native.
ClickUp just solved AI's biggest problem, and it's saving 4 million teams from productivity loss every day. Unlike ChatGPT and other AI tools, ClickUp converges all your work into one platform, so your AI super agents have full context to prioritize tasks, execute workflows, and draft documents instantly. Teams using ClickUp finish work 30% faster and cut meetings in half. Try ClickUp for free today and get 15% off AI upgrades at clickup.com/podcast. That's CLICKUP.com/podcast.
When the flu is keeping you up at night, don't try to tough it out. Knock out your flu symptoms with NyQuil Intense Flu. You got this. It provides powerful relief of your flu symptoms so you can sleep well through the night. NyQuil Intense Flu. The nighttime sniffling, aching, fever, best sleep with a flu medicine. Use as directed. Keep out of reach of children.
Hi, I'm Michael from the War and Treaty. You know the jingle. Now discover the facts about Ozempic, a GLP-1. Only Novo Nordisk makes FDA-approved Ozempic. Learn about the real thing.
Talk to your healthcare professional today. Call 1-833-OZEMPIC or visit Ozempic.com to view the medication guide and to learn more about Ozempic. Semaglutide injection 0.5 milligram, 1 milligram, and 2 milligrams.